I'm excited. It's my new software, everyone. Welcome to the Red Room. I'm Heather Carlisle. I'm delighted that you've joined me this evening. I am going to talk about one of my funnest, favoriteest topics. And the description tonight is pretty serious because I teach this to my colleagues as I did a couple of weeks ago. And it's um, it's under the topic of unconscious life scripts. And it was wonderful to teach my colleagues and for them to say how valuable this is because I don't know where I came upon this idea. It was many years ago. And I've expanded it and expanded it. And my study guide, which looks like this, you can see that. My study guide, I think this is the 7th different iteration of editing I've done on it. And I originally called it the fairy tale archetype or the paradox of childhood myths. So tonight we're going to look at life scripts, and the biggest one that's pervasive and unconscious has to do with what I call the fairy tale archetype or your childhood role models or hero. It may be a person, it may be a movie, could be a book, or a game that you played, or something you just did over and over again and it really meant you to yourself, or it was something you wanted to be. And that's half the fun of this, is going back and remembering what did you love to do when you were a little one. And it's more powerful depending on how young you were, although we've got heroes and role models that add to our lives as time goes on. But the ones with whom you identified before you were 7 years old were then implanted while your unconscious brain is being programmed or was being programmed. And so, of course, I love teaching about this because then any of us who have children or grandchildren want to know about it so that we give our little ones the best. And these heroes, because they're heroes or characters or games or a part of something, they only teach a piece. So the learnings that we get from these things are a part of life. The problem comes in, and this is the gift and the curse, the paradox. The problem comes in sometimes what the hero teaches and stands for, or sometimes what wasn't present in the story. And so we'll talk about some of these typical stories tonight. I would love for you to chime in, ask me any questions, and of course, hear about what your childhood hero was. There are some that are classics. No matter who you are, how old you are, you have heard of Cinderella. You have heard of Superman. And then there are stories that I've encountered from people who grew up in other countries. And those stories are completely unfamiliar to me. And yet, when I hear the story about the hero or what the hero did, it shows me one of the unconscious life scripts that that person carries, whether or not it's conscious. And then it becomes a pattern for living. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And I love, on my new software, it's simple. I'm sorry you had to watch a commercial, but this is our very best option. Jack has been hunting exhaustively for what's the best thing. So my chat is now my same old chat that we're all comfortable with, and the viewer is very dependable. So thank you for tuning in tonight. And anytime, chime in, whether it's a question that has to do with the topic I'm having a conversation about tonight, or something else that's on your mind. I'd love to hear from you, and thank you for tuning in. Okay, so first of all, How to Uncover Life Scripts. Think back, especially when you were very young, what it was that you really loved. And so I have various examples, and I know that now I've been working in such a way that there are so many new heroes or role models or characters that the younger generation is connecting with that are in cyberspace, video games, um, or um, what do they call those? Avatars, not archetypes, avatars. And sometimes you can make up your own. So there are many that we may be familiar with and some that we aren't. And yet, whenever I do this, especially if I have the time in my private practice office with a client, I'll have my flip chart up there, and then I will start writing down the things that they remember about that hero or role model. Now, this is one of the things, and if you can, print out your handout for tonight. So this is 3 pages from my childhood role models guidebook. The first page is, what was my first script? So it's, what was your earliest favorite fairy tale, favorite activity, role model, childhood story, television program, or famous person? So here's a place where you can write it down for yourself, and I'll be very curious to hear yours, and if you can interpret how it became a life script for you, both in the gift and in the difficulty. I'm reminding us here, this archetype or role model may not be a book or movie or a story learned. It may be a pattern of relating to your life. For example, playing explorer, rescuer, or warrior with the neighborhood kids, when you were always playing house or fort or treehouse in a particular role. And I remember there was a slough at the end of the driveway on the farm where I grew up. And I always wished I had a bigger brother so that we could be a little bit more adventurous. But there was a neighborhood boy who was a bit younger than me, and then there were about 6 of us that would go on these expeditions, like intrepid explorers, and we would put deadfalls in the little narrows in between the little islands, and name the straits and the islands and the lagoons and everything. I love that, and it's a part of a pattern in me of being an entrepreneur, being a pioneer, being an explorer, always looking for something new. And of course, growing up on a homestead set that one in stone as well. And one of my clients years ago, it was delightful, the childhood role model that she had, because it was the neighbor kids. They lived on a neighborhood where it was the last row of houses right up against some woods. And when they came home from school, they would assemble anywhere from 6 to a dozen kids. And their custom, what they did every night after school, was to play rescuer. And they would gather, they would divide into 2 groups. One group would go out into the forest and hide and then pretend to be lost. And the other group would get together as the rescuers, and they would go out when the people who needed rescuing were in place and they started calling for help. The rescuers would go out into the forest and reclaim and rescue the kids that were quote unquote lost and really and truly hiding, right? And my client was oftentimes the leader of the rescuers. That was her preferred role. And whoever was the leader of the rescuers got to wear the cape, like the superhero cape. And the cape happened to be her mom's long white slip went around her shoulders. So it was a delightful story that she told about that. And then for us to unravel how that had become an unconscious life script through her lifetime where instead of her being the more receiving person in life, she was always the one going the extra mile. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons she was in one of my Rewriting Your Future classes is that she was exhausted and discouraged, didn't know who she was or where she wanted to go. She'd been rescuing her whole life. And it was very interesting, the hobby that she and her husband had gotten into, and then after a while it wore thin and they didn't have anything else. They would go on the hunt. Every weekend, they would drive out into those places within driving distance of Dallas, and they would hunt for antiques. They would go antiquing. So just like on when she was playing rescue, she was going out into the hinterlands and hunting for something, an antique to bring home. Isn't that interesting? And so one of the disappointments she had was that her husband wasn't very energetic. He wasn't very romantic. He was pretty easygoing, didn't start anything, and of course, she was always the rescuer. She was the one who started things. She was the one that had the energy. She's the one who went the extra mile. She's the one that ran their business. And by the time she got to me, she was a little discouraged and tired. And noticing that she didn't marry a man who was of that same energy because, of course, she wanted to rescue, right? And that element was in the beginnings of their relationship, too. Isn't that interesting? There were other elements, too, of course, but I'll move on to another story. And if you have any questions, or if you have a childhood memory of a hero or a story, I would love for you to share them with us. Let's see. So in your handout, I write here in my study guide, in my handbook, I want to caution you. What do you recall about the story or the hero that comes to your mind? Because remember, your selective memories are important. When we're doing this piece of work, we don't want to remember all of the accurate details about the story. And I don't want you to go and find the little golden book of Cinderella and read it again. I want you, before you do that, it is fun to go back and do that after we've really explored it and, found all the juice in the story. I want you to make notes about the things that you remember. You won't remember the whole story. For example, someone, when she remembers Snow White, she doesn't remember the ball gown like some women do, or about the fairy godmother and the pumpkin coach, or about the prince coming to rescue her. No, I'm getting Cinderella confused with Snow White, aren't I? Or the seven dwarves. But what she remembered was the queen. The queen who looked in the looking glass and said, who is the fairest of us all? And when she got the answer that Snow White was the fairest, the queen became evil in a sense. And she took the poison apple to Snow White to poison Snow White. And that particular part of the story of Snow White is the part that made an impression on her. And it was also associated with something in her life where there was a woman who was a threat to her or who was unkind. That gave her an unconscious life script that you can't trust women or certain kinds of women. And like in Cinderella, where Cinderella is she's like the orphan. Her dad is there, but he's gone. And he married this wicked stepmother. And the stepmother, of course, as you know, most stepmothers are always preceded by the word wicked. Not that, those of us who are stepmothers want to be wicked. It's just, there are, I believe I heard the research, there are somewhere between 70 and 90 instances of wicked stepmothers in world legends. At any rate, Cinderella, in the experiences I've had with clients and students who identified with Cinderella, and there have been dozens of them, it's very common. Cinderella was even the childhood hero of two different times in my career, two lovely young um, East Indian women who had been raised in two different countries in Africa. And their fairy tale role model was Cinderella, the little gold book. So let me share with you, there are many ways that little girls respond to Cinderella. And sometimes it's for my dreams come true. Sometimes it's for coping with a difficult, if not abusive, environment. So, and that's one of the beautiful things, one of the graces about these role models or heroes or stories. They teach us things, and sometimes they comfort us by teaching us that adversity is something that we can be brave and survive. So, for example, one young woman, she was an Asian girl, and how she interpreted and remembered Cinderella. She remembered that Cinderella had to do the dirty work. She was in, in the ashes, um, wearing rags, cleaning house on her hands and knees. And what she took away from that was, because this girl had been treated harshly by the people in her life. But Cinderella, the story of Cinderella, taught her, not that her prince was going to come and rescue her, and this is where you want to be careful when you want to write down just the things that made an impression on you, just the things that were special to you or that you strongly remember. Because what she remembered was that even though you have to do the dirty work and you're treated badly, you can remain cheerful. You can stay the good person you are inside, and you can remain cheerful through the tough times. Isn't that lovely? So the story of Cinderella, in essence, was something that she hung on to, even when people treated her badly and forced her to do more than her share of the dirty work. That she held on to it, saying that Cinderella could do it, I can do it, and I can be a cheerful, kind woman. Isn't that beautiful? Then, of course, I've had women who identified with Cinderella that they had a fairy godmother, and that probably there was then a woman in their lives that came as a mentor or as a kind neighbor that fulfilled that role of the fairy godmother. And that's a lovely one. Now, that's the gift. Now let's look at the curse in the girl that said, I can do the dirty work and remain cheerful. So notice the role that she found herself in. In the book, the Cinderella book, Cinderella really is a victim. She doesn't show us that she can stand up to the wicked stepmother or talk to her dad and get the stepsisters to apologize and treat her nicely. No, she in the story doesn't seem to have a choice, where she is relegated to being treated badly. Until, of course, the prince comes. So when a girl remembers this story, like this lovely client of mine, how that life script had become a curse in her life, because what we're looking at, we're uncovering a life script that she had, which is she was always hardworking, she always had honor and integrity, she held herself high, her head high, and she had a good attitude, a positive attitude. So there's the good part of her life script. But the way that script caused her damage is that through the rest of her life, until she began to work with me, she was too tolerant. She was too tolerant of people who victimized her or were prejudiced against her or didn't treat her equally, got her to do more than the fair share of the difficult tasks or the unpleasant tasks. And she tolerated that and kept her good cheer. Didn't stand up for herself to get something healthier or better. So that's one of the ways that that script damaged her or damaged her life. Although, at any point we have a choice to improve, which means what to do about it. Well, she and I uncovered that life script with her, and then to show her that that's a part of who she was, which means use the gift, use her strength and her good cheer, and don't tolerate a job that you hate or a place where you go in life where people are not kind to you. So, any questions about this, dears? Is this interesting? Are you thinking about your own script? I'm curious. So, what was the magic in your story? Was it in you? Was it in the character or in the environment of the story? Oftentimes there's some magic in there. And then what was the resolution or triumph in the story? How did that affect you? Okay, we've got somebody. Whenever I look over here, I'm looking at the chat and I'm reading what people have typed in. Somebody asked me that just recently. I was the captain on the Love Boat. Oh my. And the interesting thing is I am a girl. Was a girl, yes. Now you're a lady. Well then, I'm wondering what you remember about that story, because I have rememberings about the Love Boat and the captain, but I'm wondering what it is that you remembered about being, why you liked to be or to visualize yourself as the captain of the Love Boat. It's a cruise ship, right? And the captain had the best time. No problems. Well, isn't that a lovely script for you to get? And the captain, of course, was in charge, right? The captain was in leadership. And he was, if I remember correctly, he was kind. He was, he had a sunny attitude. In charge, yes. And he was charming. He was handsome. And people trusted him. And of course, the Love Boat. I mean, if you're in leadership on the Love Boat, then every day is beautiful. It's sunny. It's for vacations. And if there are problems, like you said, he had no problems. If there were problems, they were trivial, and it was easy to solve those problems. So always on vacation. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing how this script has been an unconscious life script in your life. And it's no surprise that I love cruises. There you go. And, you might even at some point end up being a speaker on a cruise or some kind of associated with cruises in some professional way. So has this given you a problem? Do you have sometimes too much of a vacation, what I call a vacation attitude? Or maybe you like to be too in control, or maybe you don't know how to deal with it when things fall out of bed and there's a really bad problem, or you get really frustrated with that. I'm just curious. And she's saying, it's no surprise that I love cruises. It's not unconscious at all. I'm wondering if there is a hidden part I should dig into. Well, the way that I do that is the script shows you something, and it's usually some kind of a strengthening or inspiring or fun or positive influence. And that when you see that part, you're not aware of all the other parts around it that aren't taken into consideration. Like, did the captain have a wife? Did he have a home? No, he was just always on a cruise ship. So, I'm thinking it's kind of a fantasy life, a fun fantasy life. But, you know, what about having your feet on the ground and knowing that life is not always a vacation, and that there are things where we have to be responsible and accountable, and kids that we have to take care of. And sometimes we're not in leadership and there are other people in leadership. Those off the top of my head would be the things that wouldn't be present in the character of the captain of the love boat. And have you any of that? Can you relate to that in any way? And I'm wondering if the captain on the love boat was a way that you just really got inspired and had fun with, or it was a way for you to get away from the troubles in your life or the stressors in your life. Because sometimes that's what kids do. When there's something difficult, they'll go towards something that's going to help them distract themselves or lift their attitudes or get safer. There's an interesting story that I learned from a client where she and her siblings, she had two siblings, they made up this game, and they would play this game all the time. And it was a kind of a search and rescue but journey game. They all pretended to be dogs. And usually how it worked is there was a mother dog and then there were pups. And the mother dog was always taking care of the pups and leading the pack, so to speak. And they would go up mountains and down valleys, you know, crawling around the house, around outside, mostly around the house, over sofas and under beds and such. And they made this game a perennial activity that they did. It wasn't pleasant in their house because their parents were pretty unhealthy. And so this was a way, in essence, where they were getting away in two senses. They were getting away by pretending to be dogs, weren't human. They were getting away by going on a journey. The journey never had an end. And so they were, in essence, getting away on a journey away from the environment in their house. So they were pretending to be dogs, not the people in their family, and they were on a journey that never ended because they always wanted to continue to be on the journey and not ever come to an end. They never wanted to end it up at their house, and as little kids, where else were they going to go? So this client then realized that this had been a saving grace for her and her siblings, but also what the cost she experienced in our exploration of this story is that she was never satisfied. She didn't have a concept of arrival, of achievement, of getting something done, because she was always on the journey. She always needed to keep going. So she had a difficulty in celebrating, in acknowledging her own achievements, in taking a break. And what we did was we traced it back to that childhood activity or game that she played with her siblings that helped them weather the difficulty of an unhealthy household. Isn't that interesting? Okay, let's see. She says something. No. Share any thoughts. I'm so curious if you have any other ideas. So let's see. So then, the dimensions of your role on the page 2 of your handout. Who was your favorite cartoon, fairy tale character, favorite activity, animal? And how did you identify with the person, animal, or experience in the story? And how did that mirror you, your environment, or your feelings at the time? So I'll share one of my earliest ones with you. My grandmother read aloud to me Black Beauty the year I was 6. And every night before bed, she would read a chapter. And this was through the winter when I was going to school and had to stay at their house in town. And so I imprinted on the story of Black Beauty and Black Beauty's strength, ability to go through adversity, the grief, the strife, the successes, and yet the horse was by itself. Black Beauty went from one place to another, and never really was able to connect with one place, one owner, one home, one herd of horses. And so that's one of the patterns in me where I never felt like I belonged anywhere. Although I went many, many places. I traveled the world and adventured, was abused, had hardship, um, had inspiration. And only in this house, when Jack and I were married, have I ever felt like I was at home. And only by the time I got to Texas did I feel like maybe this might be where I belonged. But like Black Beauty, I went all over the world, did all kinds of things, difficult and inspiring. So that was the cost of that. See, the gift was that I'm adventurous. The cost of that was that I never really asked for my own home. I never looked for a place to really belong. I never really bonded deeply with someone until Jack and I got married, and that was when I was over 50. So there you have the gift and the curse of what the story of Black Beauty did for me. Any thoughts? Any questions? So curious. One of the other childhood role models I had was Jo in Little Women. I loved the book Little Women, and I identified strongly with Jo, the older daughter. And she was the more serious one. She was a writer. She was more introverted. She was the first one to leave home. She was the responsible one that kind of took care of things. And she ended up leaving home and meeting this older man from another country, the professor, and marrying him. Well, that's what I did. I started to write when I was 16, and I've never stopped. I've always been a little too serious, a little too responsible, I could give you lots of examples of that. My sister told me just, within the last 5 years, she said, I always felt a little guilty because you always made our school lunches. And I'd forgotten that I made the sandwiches for my brother and sister and I, our school lunches. So that's an example of always feeling like I was the responsible one. And then I left home first, and my first husband was more than 2 decades older than me, and they called him Doc Norris. So he was like a professor, and that obviously did not work out for me. It worked for Jo March in Little Women, but it did not work out for me. That was not a good role model for me to thrive with, shall we say. However, I learned that having the writing skill is good, learned that being over-responsible is too exhausting, learned that marrying a man way too much older than you in the end really doesn't work, etc. So somebody else, share what you think yours was. I'm so curious. It's always fun to hear. I remember a woman, and her childhood story was Lassie. The TV series Lassie Come Home, the books Lassie Come Home. And just think about the gifts and the curses of identifying with Lassie. Now, Lassie was always, she was in essence, the rescuer, wasn't she? She was a canine superhero. She was out there solving the problems. She'd come home, but she was a dog. She didn't belong, right? So she had her family, but she didn't have a spouse. She didn't have kids. She didn't have her own human life. She was loved and successful, And the area where she was loved and successful is she would go out and do some sort of rescuing. And in chatting with this woman in this workshop I did, was she actually got very serious in thinking about how she'd devoted herself to that way of being a woman, the way that Lassie taught her, and what she missed out on. So when you figure this out, you can then, like I said, start looking at what the costs are and then what to do about it. What to do about it is when you look at the cost, you can say, I don't need to do that anymore, and begin to plan and kind of get excited about adding to your life the things that you forgot weren't there, so to speak. Do you see the metaphoric or symbolic parallels or connections between the emotional state of the character and your emotional state at the age when you liked that character? So, for example, when my grandmother was reading me Black Beauty, my family was living on the farm and they were snowed in, and I had to live during the Canadian winter with my grandmother and grandfather in town. And so Black Beauty was always being farmed out different places. Do you see how the emotional atmosphere for me, because I wasn't really connected with my grandmother and I had to sleep in her bed. I didn't like her smell. And it just was a foreign land to me. I didn't belong there. And I was I was a very good girl and she was kind to me, but I didn't belong there. And Black Beauty mirrored that for me. Isn't that interesting? Which means Black Beauty then became a touchstone that, this is the way life is sometimes, and you can handle it. Many times I find that men are a superhero. And, our culture looks at what I call the white hat. The men of, like John Wayne, like the Lone Ranger, Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, Zorro, all of those superheroes, how fun it is to experience their stories, their dynamics, and we aspire to being that kind of quote-unquote good guy or good person. And yet, so many of those stories show us how to go into the world and do something big and heroic, which is good. But what's missing? Any thoughts about that, you guys? Dear viewers tonight, what's missing in those role models, those characters that we all love so much? And I want to ask you to just give me some ideas about that. And while I let you think about that, I want to share. Once I worked with a woman who, she was a little sad. She was over 50 and retired. And what we found was that, and she started to just, it clicked in her head, all of these ideas, that her favorite story, bar none, was The Little Engine That Could. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. I thought I could, I thought I could, I thought I could. So using affirmations, right? Using mental programming, using language to keep yourself going and persistent and stalwart and goal oriented, and just not giving up and going for that goal and reaching that goal and getting the success and the I thought I could, the celebration of the success and the enjoyment of that. So guess where she shone in her lifetime? And guess what she was sad about? She was a fabulous corporate international employee. She was relentless. She traveled the world. She was successful. She was positive. She was well rewarded and always on the go, always going for the next goal, always going for the next promotion, always going for the next success. And she'd achieved considerable amounts of success in her life. And yet her sadness was she had never been married. That was how strong the life script was in her. That the thought of intimate relationships and marriage and a home and a family were completely peripheral because she had fixated so strongly and in such focused a manner on the little engine that could. And she was deeply moved, I remember, in that workshop. Kind of with regret, that she hadn't known she was a little girl. And of course, when we as adults, as parents, aren't aware of this, and we find our child is really attached to something, of course it's like, okay, you like Davy Crockett? Well, let's get you the Davy Crockett hat and the boots and the gun belt. And then the child has this fabulous time playing Davy Crockett, and we enjoy it, and we think that we're participating in great parenting and mentoring for the child. Well, yes. And if that's the only one that the child connects with, then it's a limitation and it ends up being a life curse. Like I shared with you about the lady who all she had and all she developed in herself was the little engine it could. She had many admirers, people who respected her, the people for whom she had brought success along with her own success. And yet, when she came home after her retirement, she was very aware of that there was no beloved and there was no family. There was nobody there. Now, of course, it wasn't too late for her, was it? And that's how you rewrite the script. Notice what you've been doing and saying, wait a minute, I'm more than that and I want more than that. So notice for yourself, what scripts have you been obedient to? And some of them are good. It was awesome that she had the little engine that could. It's just that if I'd been her mom, and I'd known what I know now, which I didn't know when I was that young, I would have, encouraged her with the little engine that could and given her projects that were more creative, perhaps, than she might have thought of as a little girl. And then I would have given her, maybe some kind of a science kit and some way of entering the world of fine arts, whether it's if she were active with dance or maybe sports and tumbling, but give her elements of a healthy lifestyle, the way we know we want all parts of a child to be developed, the way we want all parts of our own lifestyles to be developed. And think about the people whom you know that pretty much they just work and go home, that they don't have friends outside of maybe their work buddies or their kids or their family. They don't have hobbies other than, maybe watching sports on TV. They don't have a social life. They don't have places where they go to use their talents to volunteer somewhere in the city for something that's thrilling to them and meaningful to them. So that's too narrow a life script. And this is one of the places where we get this. Of course, we get it from our parents and how they lived. We also get it from those stories and those heroes that we chose. Any examples of any other listeners, any other of my viewers? What was your favorite story, TV show, movie character, character in a book, pattern of play? One of my dear friends He was mystified until we discovered that he grew up in the New Orleans area, and he was what I call an intrepid adventurer. So he would be with the neighborhood kids, and they would be building rafts and, playing in the woods and such. So that was his model, was the intrepid adventurer. Um, think about those people like in my generation, of course. I know there are still classics though. The Nancy Drew books, the Hardy Boy books, all those series, and then they've got what is it, the Goosebumps, and the Babysitter Club. So those sequences of books that kids love, and we love that kids love them. But notice one of the things in those books. Where are the parents? Usually it's the kids because the kids are having fun being kids and doing kid stuff, right? Like Nancy Drew, solving the problem in being independent and a strong person. The Hardy Boys, again, solving mysteries. And notice that the kids are doing this in their own tribe, which is good. We want kids to do that. We want them to get along each other. But there's an absence of authority figures that are fun and stimulating, authority figures who are trustworthy and who kind of hold the boundaries safe for the kids. So that's one of the things in those particular series of books where it contributes to something that I'm deeply concerned about right now, and I have been for the last few years. How in essence, we kind of take our hands off our teenagers. And the truth is, our teenagers need the mentors, need the role models, need the adults who have very creative and adult ideas, where we kind of hold it for them, or we present that or stimulate them with that, where they find out that the authority figures aren't just, dominating, opinionated bosses or tyrants like a lot of us remember from the past, but they have really cool ideas. They have more resources internally and externally than teenagers do. So that we show the teenagers that growing up is really exciting and there's somewhere that you're working towards, and that the journey on that road towards becoming a fully developed adult grown-up is very interesting and exciting. The kids don't know that. They can't know that. They've never grown up. They watch from afar, but how they live it and how they do it, and what I want is for them to do it with us. So they see how we conduct ourselves, that we don't gossip, we don't throw tantrums, we're not insulting, that we handle ourselves with kindness and wisdom, no matter what adversity or what bravery some kind of slander or gossip or emergency holds. They find out what it's like to be an adult who is wise and kind and civilized. Okay, I've got somebody asking, so I'm going to go read. Let me see here. I need to scroll up a minute. So do you think we as parents should prevent our children from reading material whose leading characters are flawed? Absolutely not, dear. If so, wouldn't that pretty much eliminate most of all, most if not all classical literature? I assume you'll recommend that we carefully place these stories in a healthy context. Exactly. And aren't they the best teachers? Aren't they the very best teachers? So if we look at my example of the witch in Snow White, where she's looking in the mirror, who is the fairest of them all? And we talk with a child about, gee whiz, she sure is overly concerned with how she looks, but she's going to get older, isn't she? Yeah. And is Snow White younger? Yeah, Snow White is going to be prettier. That's the way it is. The young people grow up and they're beautiful. The older people get older, and it's really cool being older. So, kind of an example there. I'm more concerned about my child playing video games too much. And another person says, no kidding. Yes. I am with you with deep concern. And we have research studies now showing costs in brain development, not just in these roles or ADD or ADHD where they're not learning learning to run their own minds. There are also costs in brain development that research is now showing us. I was reading one in the New York Times just this weekend. How old are yours? 12, 10, and 7. Wow, a handful, yes. And you, 16 going on 30. Oh my gosh. Yes, exactly. To keep a 16-year-old busy and fascinated is a big deal. I was enamored with Audrey Hepburn's character in Sabrina when I was younger. Oh, yes. I love the story of a wallflower tomboy evolving into a beautiful and sophisticated young woman after her summer in Paris. That is beautiful, isn't it? Me too, and I had almost forgotten all about that. So that's the ugly duckling story, isn't it? And when we look at the great stories, they reiterate with different times, different costumes, different characters over the hundreds of years of civilization and in different countries. So that blossoming, what a beautiful inspiration to a girl who can be a tomboy and enjoy it and have that part of herself, and then have the faith that she'll develop into a beautiful woman. And nowadays, of course, there's so much of the counterculture that doesn't want us to be beautiful women. It's a little too casual, or they want us to be business leaders or scientists or whatever. Let's see, we've got some more comments. So do you think we as parents should prevent our children from reading materials whose leading characters are flawed? Oh no, wait a minute. I'm behind here. Yes. I asked the above already, but never heard your answer. Thank you. I assume that you'll recommend that we carefully place these stories in a healthy context. Yes, exactly. So what we want to do is we want to use the story as a learning tool rather than a role model. So if the child identifies with one of those characters, then what we want to make sure is we want to introduce other role models that they connect with that awaken the different parts of these children so that they are social, they are independent, they are fine with science, they're fine with math, they're fine with arts, they're fine with engineering. Maybe they're not expert in those areas, but they handle themselves. You know, they know how to run a camera and a kayak. They know how to do a little ballroom dance. They also know how to play a little basketball. So that's my preference, is I want our kids to experience themselves in all different ways. Not that they have to be expert in those ways or popular, but just that they experience in their mind and in their body, oh, I am this, I can be this, I can do this. Not that I'm going to set it as a big goal, but yeah, I'm comfortable there. Just like when I was in acting school, they taught us, we had an Olympic fencer as our fencing teacher. She was stunning. Was I ever going to be a fencer? No way, no how, but I sure do know how to handle a foil. And that was good for me. I know the posturing. I went into the world of fencing, and so it colored me for life. We want our kids to have all those dimensions so that they felt it, not necessarily that it's their lifetime goal. Ballroom and basketball, nicely put. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Sorry I gotta go. You were so great, and I look forward to Wednesdays with you here. Brava. Thank you for being one of my fans and for keeping me company and for keeping this conversation stimulating and real and alive. I really appreciate it. Let's see. We're close. We have a few more minutes left. Anybody else? Did I make that clear? That I love that question of what we do now. And notice, if you have a child, I want to remind you that we don't let our children make their own choices. Because if they do, it will be too narrow, too undeveloping, because they don't know what we know about empowerment. And so my general attitude is, yes, they need to be doing well in school, and they need at least two activities outside school that are very different from school. And probably one is physical, whether it's a sport or gymnastics or ballet or something like that, something where they're learning to be in and comfortable in their own bodies. And then something that's mentally stimulating, that's not like school. And it may be as a candy striper, it may be as a Girl Guide or a Boy Scout, it may be uh, on a debate team, it may be working on the yearbook or writing articles for something, where I like the idea of having stimulation with the world of team sports in some way, although I couldn't go there when I was a girl. I just want to dance, that's all, and that's okay. But I want something that's physically engaging, and the better, for me, probably it should have been marching band if they'd had one in those days, because the stimulation, the music, the teamwork, the artfulness of it, so that a child is so awakened and quickened in so many levels by something like that. My very favorite thing is the exchange student programs, whether you have your child go to another country or just visit another country, or have another child come and visit and live in your home, where they make bonded friendships with people of other times, other places, other countries. So that's a way for them to have role models that are real, and to keep them away from just the vicarious virtual reality. And virtual reality will always be there. When they're out of the house and gone, they can do that as much as they want. But I am not in favor of it at all. What I'm excited about is taking our kids into real life and having them see grown-ups, adults doing fabulous things in the world. So there is a book about, it's like a recipe book for teenagers on how to develop the 40 assets that each teenager needs to develop, and specific recipes, like 5 pages of recipes of how you can develop those aspects in your teenagers or in your kids. And it's from the Search Institute in Minnesota. Because I'm not an experienced mom or specialist in childhood education, I just know that that's one of the most critical things right now. If we want to make sure our people are empowered, we need to take care of our kids and give them the real experience, not the vicarious experience, but the real experience of themselves and how they are with other adults, with great role models, with other kids, and not the wrong kids, not the kids that are not keeping up. We don't want to rescue, because if we rescue, then we hold ourselves back and we don't have the leaders that tomorrow needs. So I'm always interested in fostering our kids to do brave and thrilling things. I'd rather have them on a sailboat, even if it's just a little sailboat with 2 people on it, than watching a movie about sailing. They can always watch a movie about sailing. We want to get them into it. We want to get them feeling it viscerally, smelling the wind and getting a sense of themselves on the planet. Anyway, before I tune out tonight, be careful and full of care about the stories that you share with your children. They will affect them for a lifetime, just like our stories affected us for a lifetime. They do become unconscious life scripts, and they can empower us beyond our dreams, or they can keep us in a tight little comfortable niche until we wake up and say, wait a minute, I am more than this. I can do and be and experience more than this. So thank you for tuning in tonight, everyone. I hope that this was interesting for you, and I hope it inspires you to think more about your own journey and how we influence the people around us in terms of inspiring more dimensions of who we are and who we can be, no matter what age we are. Right now, I'm watching a lady in her 60s love getting into Zumba. Anyway, thank you for tuning in tonight. And I'll see you next week, same time, in the Red Room. And thank you for joining me. Good night, everyone.